Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Knife Show, where we dissect the human psyche and society. My name is Denzel Mensa. I'm an ENFJ.
And my name is Joyce Meng, and I'm an INFJ, and we're here today to talk about empaths.
So, Google defines empath as someone who feels more empathy than the average person. These people are usually more accurate in recognizing emotions by looking at another person's face. They are also more likely to recognize emotions earlier than other people and rate those emotions as being more intense. For me, I would also say that an empath is pretty much someone which, with the recognition of saying that everybody, at least any sane person, has at least some level of empathy to them. But an empath is someone who's pretty much like incredibly and even almost unnaturally attuned to people's emotions around them, and to the point where they can absorb and take on those emotions, whether it be just the people in their house or the people in their apartment building or even people around their radius and stuff like that. Some people even say like, just taking on the world's emotions in some way, shape, or form, and then kind of like, not even kind of, but often confusing it to varying degrees with whatever emotions that they might have, and having to untangle themselves from that. So today we're going to be talking about what it means to be an empath, and some tips and even some ethics behind whether, like, if you are an empath or if you know some empaths. I personally believe that there's just like a couple, like maybe 2 to 3 rules that come with being an empath that I think that I'll share my 2 cents on. And I'd also like to mention that NFJs are pretty much any type with FE. So if you have FE in your stack, extroverted feelings, so FJs and TPs, then to varying degrees, you will be absorbing emotion. Whereas FI usually is kind of copying emotion in a way. So FI is usually finding that emotion within themselves and then being able to resonate that with other people. However, there is a disclaimer too that does not mean that there are no FI empaths, and that does not mean that there are, well, like all FJs are empaths, at least by the stereotypical sense. I know some INFJs, for example, who actually claim that they do not absorb emotion, at least not to the degree where they confuse their emotions with other people. Whereas I know some other INFJs, some ENFJs, a lot of ENFJs who take it on and they confuse them. So yeah, I just had to lay all of that out there. But Joyce, are you an empath? I don't think I've ever asked you. Do you identify as one?
Yeah, I consider myself an empath, quite an emotional sponge for the sorrows and the joys of the world. I will say a lot of NF types see themselves as empaths. Like I've seen ENFPs, INFPs, ENFJs, INFJs, all like this is probably the highest group that kind of thinks that they're empaths.
Sure.
Is
Yeah.
they're very they pay attention to the abstract pain around them. So it's almost like noticing right now, but also beyond the current context. So you're seeing the underlying meaning behind everything that's happening, and you're feeling the pain beyond the moment, but you're feeling the connectedness of, like, with these types with pattern recognition, they're able to kind of tell with their intuition that there is a bigger picture behind someone's story. And with the feeling there, whether it's FE or FI, there'll be this concern for the human aspect of the situation too. And so you'll have a lot of NF types feeling they resonate very strongly with the word empath. Not all of them, but some of them, right? And that's because of the ability to read between the lines, read into a situation, and to kind of look at the emotional impact that situation is having on that person, and also the ripple effect it leaves on the people around them as well. So back to the question of if I consider myself an empath. Yeah, I do. Like, I do feel like I absorb the emotions of the people around me. It can sometimes be a weighty matter because you can see the potential in the situation. Like, so you could see, oh, there's a suffering in this situation, but and it's causing a lot of people or that specific person pain in that situation. And if only this thing was done, it could have taken a totally different direction. And so oftentimes I'm thinking about what could be when I see someone who is going through a difficult situation. I feel for them, but I also kind of see the other path. I see path C, and I'm like, wow, if only someone said something in a slightly different tone, or if you didn't misinterpret them at this point, maybe you guys wouldn't have this shattering part of the relationship, or you wouldn't have gone through this pain in that other aspect of your life. I kind of see that little I kind of see that little point of prevention, or that little point of, if only that little piece didn't happen, then it wouldn't have caused that ripple effect. I find that a lot of situations have a tipping point. It's like, oh, that one way you sarcastically responded to your partner in that way, it was the tipping point for them feeling resentful for you for those actions. And so oftentimes I'm looking to the core root of what's causing the emotional distress. And sometimes there's so much distress in the world, it can kind of cause an unsettling within me. So when, I don't know, just the state of the pandemic to a lot of people with depression and anxiety kind of rising, the empath is who people go to kind of confide in and go like, man, this was horrible. This was devastating. And people see that the empath is open to holding space for people's suffering and their emotional turmoil. And so a lot of empaths are susceptible to people's emotional dumping. So with a lot of people kind of emotionally dumping on, the empaths, they can kind of feel drained. I feel drained. And so it's the curse and gift of everyone kind of seeing you as their therapist or counselor.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's definitely fact. I think that even from a young age, people might recognize that, empaths might recognize that about themselves. And they'd start to wonder, like, why is this, why do I draw these kinds of people to me all the time and everything? And not necessarily that it's a problem, but it's just like, that's so interesting. And what do I do about all of this? I remember that for me, and I talked about this in one of my personal videos that I made a few years ago, the ENFJ problems, paradoxes, and patches video. I had mentioned that sometimes I believe that FE can be paradoxically selfishly unselfish, or unselfishly selfish. Either way works, because it's kind of like, at least from my experience at times, when you are that sensitive to the energy around you and to the emotions of those around you, then all of a sudden you might you might you might want to dissolve that conflict, or you might want to address those emotions that other people are having and experiencing in some way, shape, or form, so that you can so that you won't be feeling those emotions anymore. So I think that's a lot of times why FE users, they try to cheer people up, because it's like, oh shoot, I am feeling your emotions, and so in order to make me feel better, then I have to help you feel better. And of course, sometimes I wonder, like, like that. I feel like there's probably like intention behind that. Throughout, whatever you might believe in. I believe in God, so it's like maybe God intentionally had that happen, because it's like, if we don't have even a baseline empathy for each other, if we're not seeing other people's pain as our own, then how much are we going to extend ourselves to be able to assist them? But it's not until we see other people in us that we're now going to try to take care of them in the same way that we probably take care of ourselves, which of course there has to be boundaries. You never should push too far when it comes to stuff like that. But yeah, I think that was like something that was really big to understand, especially for me, like growing up, that, oh, okay, these are not my feelings, but it's still weighing on me, and I should probably do something about that. And yeah, do you have any comments on that? I was about to go off on a little story, but I'll wait.
Yeah, I'm thinking about the different types of empathy. So perhaps different types empathize in different ways. So extroverted feeling is feeling with, whereas introverted feeling is feeling into. And so because FE, extroverted feeling, is feeling with, it's going to want to share the emotional experience. So if you're feeling something, it kind of wants to, in the moment, kind of bring up that emotion and like, so you can share it together and you can process it together. FE users kind of like to influence emotions and kind of like to help you with your feelings, because they can be have tough news for sure. Whereas like FI has an empathy too, but their empathy is more feeling into. So this means that sometimes they take feelings back home as homework. So because it's a introverted process, it's going to post-process, and it's also going to analyze emotions in a vacuum. So it's going to kind of want to analyze emotions without the interference of other people's emotions. Whereas like FE might like to like dance inside like a mess of emotions together, so it can analyze them all together. Like FI kind of wants to create this analyze an emotion in a vacuum. I don't know how else to explain it. Everyone does feel feelings. Yeah, so those are the two types of empathy I see present in people. And so I notice with FI, it can be a little more selective with what it empathizes with. So if I gave a scenario, let's say the same person vents to two people. One is an FE user and one's an FI user. FE users are generally more consistently reaffirming to a person. So it's more like when they're empathizing for you, it's more going to be this like you're going to feel their supportive presence throughout the entire thing that you share, and it's going to be very supportive and encouraging. So FE is more consistent because it's trying to externally validate you, right, for the thing that you're going through, and so it's going to have that reassuring quality. In general, feelers in general can have this too, whereas I notice with FI, so let's say that the same person goes to vent to an FI user. I don't know how to explain it. So FI is empathy, but sometimes they can be very selective with what it empathizes with. So it'll feel for you, but if it finds like if the TE at some point is kind of like, that is something that they might not see as reasonable to empathize with. I don't know how to explain it. So they feel for you, but it's not as consistent as an FE user's feeling for you would be, because FE is almost like it feels like they'll be supportive no matter what. Sometimes, well, they'll give you TI critique for sure, but overall, the feeling you will receive from them is consistent. Whereas with FI, if it's not empathizing for you in that moment, you can tell. And sometimes if it's in a TE mood, it'll kind of tell you, toughen up, come on, toughen up. And so it'll feel a little more impatient. You know, it's going to have the TE impatience, and it's going to kind of feel like a slap sometimes, but it's going to empathize sometimes as well. Really depends on the FI user's judgment or conclusion on whether or not it thinks what you're feeling is, I don't know how to explain it. It's being your feeling is being independently assessed when it's an FI user. It's like they're taking it in and independently assessing it. Whereas I think with FE, it's a little more reactionary. Not reactionary, I don't know. FE is a little more responsive. FE is immediately responding to your reaction, whereas FI is independently assessing, but they're like two different kinds of empathy. Whereas like I've heard like FI users, when they're being empathetic, other people might not see them as empathetic. So that this is anecdotal. These are patterns, not rules. And so if you don't relate to this, it's totally fine as well. It's just a trend I'm noticing. So I noticed like with FI users, sometimes they'll consider themselves empaths, but other people may have a harder time spotting that they're an empath, because they're like, oh, but you didn't seem that way in this scenario. Because FI's top priority is not always like showing facially that they actually feel for you. Sometimes it's felt, but it may not be, the empathy may not be fully conveyed. Or it might also be like if they're a very soft FI user, then it will be conveyed. But if they're more like hardened around the edges FI user, it may not always. Whereas like for FE users, if they consider themselves empaths, other people tend to also reaffirm and go like, yeah, that person's totally an empath. Because there's a congruency between FE's actions showing you that it's empathizing and its internal state of being an empath too. So while FI and FE may both be empaths, they might be perceived a little differently by different people.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. That makes total sense actually, because I don't. Jamila's never identified as an empath. My wife, ISFP, but I do know that as an FI Dom and as a four, she probably deals with the deepest and most darkest of feelings out there, and I feel her in those states of mind. I feel those feelings, and I can't handle them when I'm in those situations with her. And sometimes I'll literally like ask her, I'm like, "Are you okay?" She's like, "Yeah, I'm fine," and she looks totally fine on the outside, but it's like I know that you're not fine because because I feel what you're feeling. Of course, I don't necessarily like say that. In fact, that's one of the ethics that I'm going to be mentioning later. But I think that it'd be like kind of like invasive to always tell somebody like, I feel what you're feeling. You're lying to me. You know, it's just like, all right, if you don't share, then you don't want to share, and that's cool. But I'm gonna go over there because I cannot handle that emotion. Whereas FI users, they can handle that depth of dark emotion turmoil. Whereas like me, at least for me as an FI user, like I can't really go down there. And this actually reminds me of uh, just a small like passage in typeandmy.com about the ENFJ in this is in the introverted intuition section. I'm gonna try to read it like as fast as possible. But this is one of the passages that made me like immediately know when I first got into type. I was like, whoa, yeah, I'm definitely an ENFJ. NI is a secondary function of the FE NI, the ENFJ. NI takes all the information gathered by FE and makes connections with other information previously gleaned to help determine the meaning of the new information. Because NI is serving the dominant function, FE, this type of person might be able to pick up and draw in feelings of other people around them. They might even feel everything they pick up all at once. Because their thought process jumps around so much, they might not associate certain feelings with people they originated from in the moment, but rather pick up an emotion from someone without noticing and wonder why they are feeling so differently all of a sudden. Compare this to FE with SI, which can look at people's faces and linearly determine exactly where each feeling is coming from. High FE types in general might describe picking up, sensing, or feeling the moods or emotions of other people. FI users might relate to this too, but they tend to put their focus on one person at a time. FE and I should be aware of this tendency in themselves and know that if their mood changes suddenly, it's likely due to picking up feelings from someone around them. With thoughtful reflection, the FENI can typically untangle feelings that belong to someone else as they retrace the steps of their NI process using TI, more on TI below, when the FENI gets stuck experiencing other people's emotions as though they are their own. They might not immediately recognize that they are actually dealing with a sort of involuntary empathy. This can be distressing to the FENI as they might begin searching internally for the source of the emotion and place pressure on themselves to internally explain or rationalize an emotion isn't really theirs in the first place. As they become more and more aware of this tendency, they can develop their TI to recognize this process closer and closer to the time it starts happening, and eventually they can learn to differentiate their feelings from the feelings of others. So yeah, that passage was so incredibly poignant and just illuminating for me when I first got into type. And about 2 years ago, actually, story time, I experienced something like I always had this like growing up, like what I just read. That was always a thing for me. But especially like I think one of my biggest episodes of this was I was watching the movie Creed 2 with Jamila sitting beside me, and then There was like we were in the front row, so this was also most likely a mistake. But the theater was packed, which again was another problem. And Creed 2, for those of you who don't know, is a boxing movie. And it is pretty violent. And there is a scene where, so like I said, like me and Jamil are sitting in the front row, and there's a scene where Michael B. Jordan's character is getting brutalized. And at the same time, while he's getting brutalized, then his family is standing on the sidelines, and not only is he is he getting brutalized by like the punches and everything, but the family is like just emotionally wrenched. And I literally started to shake as if I was having a seizure. And Jamila looks at me and she's like, "Are you okay?" And I'm like, "Yeah, I'm fine." But then tears just started just coming from my eyes. And I had to get up and swiftly leave the movie theater. And it was actually embarrassing. I was like, whoa, like, and I was hoping that nobody saw what happened, but it came up on me like so quickly. And I was wondering like, what the heck just happened here? And of course, upon like reflection, I started to realize like, yo, I was probably absorbing all of the emotions from the people around me as they were watching that scene. And not only that, but then my HSP combined with all of that. It's like, so I'm highly sensitive to what was going on the screen with the punches and all of that. And it just combined to like make this like almost traumatic experience for me. And so ever since then, I had to be even more careful with the things that I watch, surrounding myself with certain groups of people and that are highly emotional in certain types of like energy. And yeah, I think that's one moment that I was like, yeah, this what they just said on Type in Mind definitely is true. And yeah, I'm most definitely an empath.
That is so amazing, Denzel. Goes back to the feeling with, FE is feeling with, is sharing emotions. So it's kind of like someone, it tangles its emotions with other people's emotions. And so just like how extroverted intuition is a little bit like tangled up ideas with each other, FE is kind of like tangled up emotions. And so I can kind of feel like, how do I separate my spaghetti noodles from someone else's spaghetti noodles? They're all like sticked up. That's how it feels like to kind of have people feeling around you. You can kind of absorb it, like bounty tissues absorbs water. Yeah,
They sure do absorb a lot.
Absolutely. Yeah, and that empathy can be overwhelming because you have all of these emotions felt, but not a lot of action you can do with it. So you're just kind of like, ooh, that did not feel that good.
Yeah.
And that's why empaths might feel very sensitive to households that have negative emotions around them. So let's say your mom or dad or brother or sister are highly critical. They're highly fault finding. They're highly commenting on all the bad things, but never on the good things. As someone who's an empath and absorbing all the emotions around you, it feels horrible to be in an environment where there's only negative emotions being spread around. It feels like death, actually, because you're taking on all of those insults on a very, like, they're sticking to you. They're sticking to you like Velcro. It's like emotions don't just affect the people in the exchange. It kind of feels like you're a Velcro, and the Velcro is sticking to people's feelings, and you have these feelings stuck to your Velcro. And sometimes it can be difficult to tell apart what's stuck on the Velcro and what's actually your emotions.
Wow. Yeah, that's beautiful. Joyce, I was wondering, and it's okay if you don't, but do you have any stories? It doesn't have to be like, I guess, as intense as mine, but like, do you have any stories of you as an empath, as an INFJ, that you recall off the top of your head?
Yeah, good question. So I'm a life coach, like Denzel is. And sometimes when my clients come to me and they tell me their story, I want to cry along with them. So they're experiencing something really hard, and just their emotion gets me emotional. And so it's almost like wanting to be there for them, meeting them where they're at, feeling with them. It invokes this type of, man, now I feel like I watched a sad movie, and now I feel like I'm in the sad movie, and then now I'm out of it now.
Yeah.
It's immersive. someone feeling around you and the moment is immersive.
Yeah.
And that's why, like, sometimes I can even be a little bit conflict avoidant, because when you absorb everyone's emotions, when you've noticed the effects of a negative atmosphere on your mood and on your emotional health. And so when people are always fighting, it's exhausting and it goes nowhere. And so sometimes you'll develop I developed a conflict avoidance-ness to it sometimes. Like, oh, people are fighting around me. Like, it's a preventable fight too. And I'll go like, this doesn't have to happen. Now I have to absorb all of these horrible emotions. If you guys just, I guess that's why I notice, oh, if they just talk to each other in a little bit of a softer, more tender tone, it wouldn't have happened. Because there's so much energy expenditure that happens when they start to fight and the emotions get passed around. And then now it just feels like, do you know that kid at gym class that gets hit with all the balls? I kind of feel like when people fight around me constantly, like it's a reoccurring fight and people just day after day, the cycle repeats itself. You can feel like a kid who's been hit with the ball in gym class many times. It's like, guys, please stop fighting. It's really affecting me. It literally feels a little bit traumatic because you're absorbing all these you're absorbing the impact of the feelings around you, and it hits, and you, because it hits, you want to do something about it. You kind of want to help in some way, right?
Yeah.
A lot of situations, the problems are systemic, and so although you would desire to lend a hand, sometimes the problems are so deeply rooted that no matter what you do, you won't have an impact. So empaths are kind of stuck feeling, and then when they try to figure out ways to make the situation better, a lot of the cases it's not possible because there are so many underlying factors that need to be changed for the situation to change.
Wow.
And so it feels utterly overwhelming sometimes.
Yeah.
And so maybe it creates, like, empaths are more likely to be HSPs because when you absorb the feelings around you so much and you aren't able to find a clear solution right away, it can feel like you're getting barraged. And that overwhelm can cause a sensitivity to those type of situations because they occur so often. The compound effect might really kind of mess with your brain a little bit.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. As a matter of fact, I think this should be a moment where now we've described a lot of what being an empath is, but a lot of times we might not see online what an empath is not. So a lot of people probably at this point could probably be like, oh yeah, no, I'm totally an empath. I totally resonate, all of that. Here are some points or some ways that, or some things that I wanted to just mention that an empath is not. Number one, an empath does not mean that they can read minds. I think that this is actually a misconception. A lot of times, kind of like how even ENFJs and INFJs, because they have that introverted intuition piece, and it's matched with the FE, it can give the illusion that they're reading minds, but in actuality, an empath is actually just going off of the vibrational energy and is seeing those patterns and then kind of associating in past situations. Oh, when I felt these patterns from other people, this tended to be like what they were thinking. I'm associating now this aura and this energy with this thought. And so they can have a pretty good guess, an intuitive guess on what you might be thinking based off of the energy that you're emanating and what you might be feeling. But an empath is not a mind reader. This is just still intuitive leaps and guesses. And then the second thing that I'd say is just because you're an empath does not make you special or even magic, which I feel like that's like, self-explanatory, but a lot of times you might look up even after watching this video or even before watching this video, you've seen a whole bunch of things where they're fluffing up empaths, and you might even see a whole bunch of memes online like, I'm an empath and I'm so tortured, and just stuff like that, and making it seem as if like, oh yeah, I can always tell when people are lying, and I don't know why they're always covering their eye, but I guess it helps them see more or something, I don't know. But we're going to say that being an empath does not make you any more special or unique than the average human being. Those are just a few things I wanted to like throw out there before anyone might like get a big head or start to think of their empath friend as somebody who's like magical and mystical in some way.
Empaths are not people who give to get something in return. So
Mm.
people who are transactional, people who are like, oh, I'll feel for you so you can give me something. Um, yeah, that is manipulation, not empathy.
Yes. Yeah, yeah, I agree. Well, then, lastly, I wanted to wrap up this video with three things that I call empath ethics. So kind of like rules, like just like the great Spider-Man quote, like with great power comes great responsibility. So these are some ethics that I'm not imposing on people, but I believe that if you are an empath, you should probably like abide by these rules. So number one, boundaries on people's privacy and emotions. I think that's a really big thing that I took on because, like, eventually, I think that if you're really like an empath, you you kind of learn this early on that people do not like, kind of like the mind reading. People don't like you always knowing what they're feeling and then telling them what they're feeling. Like that's not even kind of, it is invasive. And I know that it's not you trying to, take on their feelings and stuff like that. But if somebody's like clearly like in a very angry mood or like in a very depressed mood and they give you that lie to you, it's like, no, I'm fine or whatever like that, even if visibly they might even look fine, like, oh yeah, no, I'm fine, but you feel that they're not fine. I personally believe that as an empath, they have the right to their mood. They have the right to their emotion, and you have to almost operate as if you do not even compute that emotion from them. Take whatever they're saying as like, okay, yeah, sure, you feel it. Like that person's not okay. But I think that unless if they are like actually contemplating suicide or killing someone, um, I feel like you should let them be and kind of operate as if you don't have those abilities. But it doesn't hurt to at least ask that one or two times. Like I think like for me, what I do is I'd ask the person like, hey, is everything all right with you? I don't know, I just feel like something might be bothering you or something. It's like, oh, I'm fine. And then the second time, it's the last time I'd ask, like, okay, are you sure? Yeah, I'm fine. All right, then cool. I'll let it be. Then I'll just let it rock. If anything does come up, you know where to find me. But all right, I won't speak about it anymore. And leave it at that. Because once again, that person clearly does not want to talk about whatever issues that are going on, and they have the right to keep that to themselves. And just because
Mm-hmm.
you have the ability to sense that of them does not mean that you also have now a divine um, right to invade in that. So that's ethic
Mm-hmm.
number one.
Yeah.
Empath ethic number two, don't brag or believe yourself to be superior, which kind of goes back to like what I was just saying before. Like again, like a lot of empaths, like they might have that whole I can read minds, which is not true. It's like, oh, I always know when people are lying, which I guess technically you can know if somebody's lying about their mood, but you won't know if they're lying to you in like a manipulative manner in some way, shape, or form all the time. So that's still not a thing. But even if you did, there's no reason to like brag on being an empath. I believe that I personally, once again, everything is just my personal belief. I believe that if you're really an empath, it's not something that you go around talking so much about, like bragging about. Like that doesn't mean that like somebody might not tweet it ever or something like that. But like, I just feel like people that I think are real empaths, they are kind of like low key about it. It's almost like Clark Kent and Superman in some way, shape, or form. Versus somebody who's just always putting it on display as if they want attention for it. I don't think that. Not to say that person is not an empath, but I just feel like that's not usually how empaths operate. And then the last empath ethic that I'll list is help people. It's a gift, which I fully believe. I believe that being an empath is a gift. It does come with a little bit of a curse, which is that responsibility, and also, the pain that you receive from being around people, and it's involuntary at times. Like, if you're in an abusive like household and stuff like that, it's hard for you to just shut out in that way because you're so tapped in and you just can't like block yourself from that. But use that ability to be able to help people, to be able to feel the people around you and aid to them. Like, shoot, this person, who is that? Oh, shoot, I think that person is feeling some type of way, even if they don't know you. Go to them. It's like, hey, I know it's going to seem weird, but I just wanted to ask, is everything all right? And again, if they say yes and you ask them, are you sure, or whatever, and they still say yeah, everything's fine. Remember empath ethic number one, let it be. Just let them know that the door is open in case if they ever do need anything. So that's my 2 cents.
These are great empath ethics. Sometimes with empaths, they can feel worn out because they've been empathizing so much and they can kind of feel a little bitey. So sometimes after too much empathy, they might get a little bit, they might get a little bit like when your cat gets a little frustrated with you petting it and it just wants to bite you after. Yeah, sometimes the empaths can actually have a mean side because they were like being so soft. They might get the repercussions of not caring for their own well-being, and they might get a little frustrated, and they might feel a little neglected, and so it might come out in ways of them actually, ironically, mistreating people, even though they're empaths. And so an empath ethic is to make sure you take care of yourself, so you never get to that point of resentment where you are kind of bitey and being counterproductive to your purpose, which is helping people. Because sometimes people go in with the intention of helping someone else, and then sometimes they do more damage than they do good. And so sometimes with empaths, you're doing the other person a favor by taking care of yourself, because then you won't be in a nasty mood later, and people won't have to deal with the leftovers of your mood. It's kind of like this. You have a bucket. If the bucket's filled to the brim with water, if you try to fill it with more water, it's going to overflow and you're going to cause a mess, and it's going to take a long time to clean up. The same thing is with empathy. Like, if you take on too many people's emotions, your bucket's going to be too full, and then it's going to overflow, and it's going to cause a mess in your life. It's going to cause a mess in other people's life, and you're going to have to spend some time cleaning it up. So the best way to prevent that from happening is to set boundaries. I know as an empath, it can be difficult to set boundaries because you want to be there for the people around you because you feel for them. But also,
literally,
sometimes the best move for the future relationship or for the future bond is to actually set boundaries, because although in the short term you may not be able to help them in the fashion that you want to, in the long term it'll be more sustainable, and that sustainability will ultimately nurture the relationship. So I guess an empath ethic is to be empathic to yourself, and to notice your gut, to notice when you're over burning yourself out, because when you're burnt out, it's hard to help anyone. Like, when you're burnt food, it's hard to serve it to anyone and to provide them nutritional value. Let's say your empaths are cooks, right? If you notice that now all your cooking is burnt food, it's better to just brush up on that cooking knowledge and to really like take care of yourself first, and to make sure you're oriented right the first time. So making sure like you kind of build up the foundation so that you'll be able to cook people unburnt food so that they have nutritional value from the things you provide them. The same thing is with yourself. If you take care of yourself, you will have the ability to help other people. But if you notice that the love you're giving is not having the intended effect that you would like to have, it might be a signal to take care of yourself, or to reorient yourself, or to calm down and pause for a while, and to give yourself that relaxation time you need to recenter. And it can be so hard because it's hard to justify, taking care of myself, that doesn't make sense for me to do. Sometimes it's the best action.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely.
Yeah, and I guess another empath tip I'd like to give is sometimes empaths need other empaths. It's kind of like how therapists need other therapists. Like your therapist always has to see another therapist, and your counselor always has another counselor they talk to after a full day of counseling. And I think the same thing is with empaths. After you tend to other people's needs or you feel for their emotions, it's nice to have other empath friends, so you're not holding the weight of the world on your own, and you have somewhere where you can exchange empath energy. I don't know how to explain it, but it's healing. Being able to have someone empathize for you sometimes is a form of self-care. So having empath friends is self-care.
Yeah, 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 exactly. Joyce, that was lovely. Awesome. And per usual, we've been your hosts. So y'all let us know what you think. If you're an empath, let us know some of your experiences, some empath ethics that you may have developed. And if you're not an empath, still go ahead and comment any thoughts that you might have. Joyce and I also offer profiling sessions, and so if you want to be profiled by us, then refer to the link in the description below. And also, if you would like to recommend like any topics that you'd want for Joyce and I to cover, then also go ahead and comment that below. But until next time, stay sharp.
Stay sharp.
また夜が明ければお別れ夢は遠き幻にあなたを追いかけ